Candice, afternoon to you.
Afternoon.
Good to have you with us. I mean, there's some disturbing stories here, and listening to Yvette Cooper setting out plans for a public inquiry, something she couldn't bring herself to do for the mass grooming and raping of thousands of young girls, but she's managed it for this.
Yeah, she has. I watched her speech in the House of Commons, and I just thought, she's just not hitting the right notes. You know, I think people have just lost. There's such a huge loss of faith and trust in politicians, in local authorities, in social services, in so many of these sort of public bodies that are there to manage these situations. And I just don't think the public trusts them to do it. You know, they think there'll be an inquiry, but it won't do anything. That's how people see things, you know. They don't think that the right questions will be asked or the right answers will be given. I think although people do want an inquiry for the grooming gangs, I do think that there is a skepticism sometimes about inquiries.
Yep.
People sometimes view them as just like whitewashing or a way for governments to just draw a line under things and sort of not have to deal with the difficult issues that these things raise.
I mean, the system is clearly broken when somebody can be referred to the PREVENT programme on 3 occasions. This is the counter-terrorism scheme. The case was not referred onwards. Why, nobody can yet answer. We know he had an interest in school shootings, the London Bridge terror attack. All of this information was known by the authorities. And we're going to get the same story that we've had so often. It was how many times, you know, when it's a death of a child, often it's those kind of cases where a sort of baby P sort of story happens. And of course there was one more recently that gripped the nation with the level of horror, and you realise that the dots were not joined up. How many times do we hear that as the reason? You know, that agency didn't speak to that agency, they didn't pass it on to them. And the Tories were in charge, by the way, when a lot of this was going on.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you know, some of the things that have emerged are very disturbing, you know, that he went on a rampage at his old high school and had to be physically restrained. I mean, he was being cared for at home. One thing that came out was that, you know, he'd gotten into a taxi before, like a few days before, and his father had come out and convinced the taxi driver not to take him. I mean, he was becoming increasingly isolated. I mean, we've seen a number of cases like this of men who, you know, seem to be, you know, channeling, you know, a lot of dysfunction and isolation and alienation into this violence. And, you know, it's not necessarily that they're Islamists or, you know, might have an interest in terror and they might show an interest in violence, but it's not necessarily that they're going to go off and join ISIS. And, you know, there's all these sort of vectors online in various places that the increasingly alienated are finding a way to express their anger. And this is a very new phenomenon. I mean, all these rampage killings and school shootings and various things. I mean, these things, you know, never occurred before in the last, you know, this is a new thing. This is a thing that's very specific to our time. And I think we need to try and, like, understand what it is, like, what's driving this. You know, you can't, I think it's inadequate for the authorities to just, like, try and manage it by monitoring the internet or having a PREVENT program. I think we need to look at the deeper meaning, you know, what is going on here?
And I also think that if Keir Starmer is serious about a line in the sand, which was the phrase he used this morning, and clearly the system is broken and, you know, we need to keep our country and our children safe, and I'm slightly paraphrasing here, but these are the kind of words he used, then he might want to take a look at the English Channel, where hundreds of people, who we have no idea who they are, mostly young men, are coming over to our country without any identification, clearly from some countries that I think on any other day of the week would be of interest in this area, and yet that gets a free pass. I mean, I don't know how anybody, I struggle to know how we take Keir Starmer seriously on any day of the week, but particularly today. Surely there is I'm not suggesting, by the way, everybody who comes over on a boat is a criminal. I don't for one second. I'd imagine most of them are not criminals. However, you only need 1 or 2. The fact is they are unidentified males coming into our country from some iffy regimes and places. I think we need to know who they are.
Well, yes, and you know, I think that's just a very natural human reaction. I mean, you know, this is our home. You know, we build communities where we live, and we want to sense of belonging. And you know, as you say, if you just have lots of people coming in, you don't know who they are. even on a subconscious level, I mean, we're saying it explicitly, you're going to feel less safe. You're going to feel less trust in your environment. And if you perceive the politicians and the authorities who are supposed to be managing the system as weak, as not doing their job, that's going to lead to such frustration. And I do feel that there is a huge loss of trust. And I think it's, you know, obviously it was directed at the Conservatives in the last election. I mean, there was huge anger at the Conservatives and the way that they'd mismanaged this. And this is partly why Keir Starmer got elected. It was a very weird election in many ways, but now it's been directed at Keir Starmer because I think the malaise goes it just goes so much deeper. You know, people just don't feel that what we've got people feel that the system has just become chaotic, that it's, you know, we're sort of living in a time of real unraveling.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one, by the way, from Rob in Preston, who says, how can Starmer label all the protesters and rioters as far right? But does that not impact on a future trial? Because calling it a terror attack does. Two-tier, I would say. That's a really good point, actually. I mean, people who were, you know, OK, you might have been literally caught red-handed, rioting or doing something awful, but you might have just been hanging around in the street. And then, you know, there would be a reasonable suggestion that if you were going to plead not guilty, you might get a jury trial, and that jury would already be aware that you've been labelled as a far-right agitator. That's a fair point from Rob.
It is a fair point. I think as well, some people pointed out at the time that there'd been tweets from certain government bodies implying that these people were criminals before they'd even been convicted. So, I mean, a certain level of incautiousness when it came to discussing the rioters. I mean, I don't know if you read Fraser Nelson's really interesting column in the Times this weekend. It was, you know, really, really, I mean, kind of presaged the conversation that we're having today. And he was saying that, you know, Keir Starmer needs to decide if he's a lawyer or a politician because he's got very strong lawyerly instincts, which is fine. But in a situation like this, you need to be a statesman. You know, he's a very process-driven guy, and that's absolutely fine. But I think in a moment of extreme tension and emotion like that, you have to come in and you have to reassure people somehow, even just dispelling myths, you know, even if that's just it, you know, just sort of saying something like, listen, you know, we need to gather all the facts. I don't want to prejudice a trial, but can I just say the information that's online about this guy is false. It is categorically false. You know, just things like that. But I mean, we never got any of that.